Hello, welcome to another in the studio. In this video, we'll be making a custom layered clap snare loop. So I've gone ahead and made the loop already and bounced it out to audio. It's this guy here. And I also put together a simple little groove so we have something to work with. So let's have a quick listen to this so you know what we're working towards, and then we'll dive right in. Here we go. Okay, simple, but it'll do the trick for the video. Okay, so yeah, I just want to walk you through the entire process of making this loop. So we're going to talk about why I picked the samples that I did. We're going to look at each layer individually and do some processing on the individual layers, as well as, shaping the sounds, getting them into the right pitch, adding some movement and interest to them. So I'm going to be doing things like velocity mapping on one of the layers, and then we'll have a look at processing all of the sounds on the group track to really solidify everything together, tie everything together, and just make it more cohesive and sound as one. And yeah, let's go through the entire process. So let's mute this audio bounce of the loop here, and we'll start with the first layer, which is this snare mid here, and this sounds like this. Okay, so it's really more of like a white noise kind of snare sound. So first thing I want to do here is let's just drop in a couple MIDI hits on the 2 and the 4, like so. And let's shape the sound first. So let's just play with the envelope. So I'm going to enable that, and for right now I'm just going to play with the decay. I think somewhere about there is good. Yeah, then I'll just give it a little bit of sustain and a little bit of release there. But that just tightens that sample up a little bit. That's what I'm looking for out of this sample. I want it to be a little bit more, short, tighter. Won't take up as much space in the mix. So I think that's pretty good. Let's head back into the piano roll here. There's just a couple little moves I want to make with this. So I'm going to turn the velocity slightly down, ever so slightly, on the first snare hit. And then I'm going to go to the note filter cutoff frequency here. So essentially what I'm doing is I want to make just some slight variation between the first and the second snare here. So I'm going to turn the velocity down a little bit on that first one, and also I want this one to have slightly less top end than this one does. So we're going to use the filter cutoff for that. So that's way too much. Something like that. Just give those two snares a little bit of variation between the two, and that really does add to the groove. Okay, but we're gonna keep this one fairly static and simple, and then work in some more movement on some of the other layers. Okay, so let's also play with the decay. So I'm gonna create an automation clip for this decay here. And let's just make this a one bar loop for the automation clip. And so what I'm doing here is I just want the second snare to have a slightly more open decay. So we'll keep this one. Actually, I won't even move this down to 17 here. So we're talking like 1%. Just so that we get a teeny little bit of variation between the decays on the alternating snares. So this will be snare mid, decay. Okay. And these teeny little like micro modulations, they really do add up in the long run, I think. Okay, so that one is fine. Let's just maybe add an EQ here, just to maybe clean it up a little bit, because you can see that there's some information down here below kind of the fundamental hit right here. I don't need that in there. That's just gonna end up muddying things up. So I'm just gonna get rid of it right now. So I'm gonna cut around 250 or so on this just to clean the sample up. Okay. And that's really all I want to do for the for the main layer. Okay. All right, so the second sample that I chose here is this one right here. And so let's just plot this down here. So just for a second, I'm going to just loop this over one bar. Okay. And we'll turn this up a little bit as well. Okay, so that's how they sound together as of right now. But let's go into the piano roll. And usually the first thing I like to do when I'm doing this is get the pitch and the timing right, and then I'll go ahead and shape the sample and then maybe do some modulation or processing on it. So let's get the pitch right first, or at least see if a different pitch sits better. So let's have a quick listen here. I'm just going to pitch this up and down, and we'll see if we can find a better spot for this to sit. I actually like it here at the A. And it actually is going to work out nice because I want the kind of the most of the high-end energy coming from the main sample, the snare mid here, which has a lot of high end in it. So I think that just sits nicer with the snare layer that doesn't have as much high end. It's going to kind of provide a little bit more mid-range. Okay, so I like it pitched down to the A there, pitched down a couple semitones. And let's see if we can change the timing here. So the snare mid is triggered right bang on the grid here, but I think we can move this off the grid, and that'll just give extra space for the snare mid layer. So let's try moving it back behind the beat. See. Yeah. So instantly that just opens things up a little bit because the transients aren't layered right on top of each other. You can hear when I push it back a couple ticks that it just seems like it has more space to breathe and it's less, congested. They're not fighting as much. So have a listen. When I click it over, you can really hear it just open up and just sit there a little bit better. Yeah, I think that's the ticket there. That's going to work quite nice. All right, so those are sitting more comfortably together. Now let's shape this. Okay, oh, what am I doing here? Wrong spot, sorry. Okay, so let's head into the zone tab here on direct wave, and I'll just shape the envelope here. So I'm going to turn the sustain down for a second, and we'll just play with this decay. Think about there is good, and maybe we'll give this a little bit of sustain as well. Yeah, about there. Cool. So now that we have it shaped, I'm going to use some velocity mapping on this layer to give it some movement and just some variation, and just to make it more interesting and make it, feel a little bit more human. But actually, before I get to that, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's do some EQ work on this. Okay. Okay, so let's do this here on this layer. I'm going to just use the EQ2 here, parametric EQ2, and I'm going to clean this up a little bit, do a little bit of a low cut here. But I'm not going to go quite as far up as I did on the first sample. We'll let this have a little bit more low end in it. I'm also going to roll off the top end on this one to, again, just kind of let that main sample have the majority of the top end, and that'll just, I think, help them sit together a little bit nicer. So just do a gentle curve here and maybe roll everything off above around 10K or so. Yeah. Another thing I'm going to do, so on the snare mid here, kind of have some peaks down here around 280 and 400. What I'm going to do on the snare layer is just notch those sections out a little bit. Not by a lot, but just I'm going to just do a little dip here at 280, just to let that kind of fundamental frequency kind of poke through on that snare mid. So I'm going to dip that down by around 3 dB there, and then we'll make another one here at 400. Just like that. And another thing, you notice this sample here is kind of down the middle, but it's got some width to it. And I purposely picked, you know, I wanted a sample that wasn't mono, that had a little bit of width to it already as is. So that's going to layer, you know, nicely with the mono snare. It's going to kind of wrap around that mono snare, and they're going to complement each other. If I was to pick another mono sample, then I mean, they're going to be right on top of each other, be right in each other's grills, and they're just not going to layer and mix as well. So you want to think about that. You know, what do you want this sample to contribute to the overall, you know, loop? So the mid sample, that's my main sample. I kind of want that to be, you know, kind of short, snappy, and have most of the high-end content. And this snare layer, and it's mono, the snare layer, I want it to have a little bit more width, you know, to kind of give the loop a little bit more width. And I want it to be just a little bit more mid-range focused, and kind of provide more of like an actual like organic snare sound, whereas this one actually sounds more like a real snare, and this one's just more like noisy. Okay, so we have this EQ here, and I think I actually want to boost some of the mid-range, but instead of using this EQ2 here, I'm going to use the Pultec to do the boosting. So, nope, that's the wrong one. It's this one here. So I'm going to probably boost somewhere around 700 or 1K. So I'm going to just turn this up pretty extreme for a second, and then we'll kind of flick between these. Yeah. I'm liking that. That's just kind of filling out that mid-range a little bit. The pull text adding a little bit of nice color to it. And it's kind of filling in some of the absent frequencies from the mid-range, from the main snare here, the snare mid. You can see, you know, there's not a lot going on in that 700 area. So that's just kind of filling that space a little bit on the snare layer. Okay, cool. So we got some nice EQing there, helping those sit nicely. Now let's get back to the velocity mapping. Okay, so let's head into the zone tab here. We've already set the envelope. So what I'm going to do is actually turn, let's see, instead of the voice gain, I'm just going to reset this. I'm going to switch this to the, we'll go with the amp attack. And I'm just going to go for a small amount of modulation there, maybe 3%. So essentially that means that the lower, now the velocity is not controlling the gain or the volume. I'm going to use it to add a little bit of movement and variation. So the lower velocity levels are going to have a tighter attack, and the higher velocity is going to be slightly increased, but we're only applying this by 3%, so it's going to be very, very subtle on the attack. And then we're going to set up another one here for, so we're going to go note velocity, and we're going to control the decay. So this one I'm going to go a little bit more, maybe about 30%. So again, if I should show you here what this is actually doing, this means that the lower velocity levels are also going to have a the lower the velocity, the tighter the decay. You can see there. Okay. All right, and let's do a few more here. Oops, sorry, I'm all over the place. Okay, so we're going to turn this one off as well. We're going to go note velocity again, and this time I'm going to go for the sustain. Maybe go about 20% here. So again, the higher velocity values are going to have slightly more sustain in it. And then we're going to go one more note velocity, and this is going to control the decimator mix. So if I just turn this on and turn it all the way. And again, just to show you, for those who aren't familiar with this and how it works, it's really, really simple. If I turn this all the way up, the modulation amount, that just simply means the higher the velocity, the more distortion we're going to get. There we go. But that's too much on the distortion. I don't want it that pronounced and that obvious. So I'm going to just dial this step back a lot, so it's just much more subtle, just so it kind of gives a slightly different flavor to some of the sounds. So okay, and then I'm going to just dial this amount back to, so we're only about to 19-20% or something like that. Okay. All right, so now we have the velocity values altering the attack, the decay, the sustain, and the distortion amount here. So there we go. And then I can just copy this across for 8 bars and just alter the velocities at random. So we have not one of the hits will be exactly the same. They'll be all slightly different. Not different enough to throw you off, be like, what's going on here? This is, odd. But just enough where it just makes it a little bit more interesting. Okay, so let's just copy this across for 8 bars. And then we'll just come over here. And I'm just going to kind of randomly play with these velocities. Yeah, that's fine. That is fine. And then I'm actually going to do the same thing for the panning on each of these hits. Not a lot, but a little bit. So I'm just going to go through here, go through these and just move them over kind of at random. Maybe keep it within like 10, 11%, but just kind of move these around a little bit. Keep that one in the center. Something like that. So we have a little bit of kind of movement with the panning slightly. I'm just going to make it feel a little bit more alive. Okay, cool. And we'll just solo that so you can kind of hear what it sounds like soloed out. And then you can come back in here and adjust the velocities to taste. But for the video, I'm just going to leave it like that. It's fine. But you can hear that there's, not one or not 2 hits are exactly the same. All right, cool. So that has some nice variation on it. The velocity mapping there. Okay. And let's just kind of mix this in. yeah, I liked it with the decay and the sound a little bit more tight, I guess. So just adjusting those a little bit. All right, let's move on. And the next thing we're going to do is add like a wide clap accent here. So this is the sound I picked out here. So I made 2 copies of this, one on the left and one on the right. Okay. Now I have both of these routed to track 16 here, and I have this control surface set up. This is just so I can control the decay and the sustain of both of those layers without having to fiddle with them individually. So this is linked to both the decay of the left and the right layers here, as well as the sustain. Okay, so what we're going to do here is add a nice little accent at the end of every 4 bars. So let's just loop up this bar here for a second and put this in here. So on the left layer, and we'll go to the other one. So that was the left layer. So let's go here and boom. So what I'm going to do here is, these are already pretty wide samples as is, but I want to make them even more wide. So what I'm going to do is play them a semitone apart from each other. So on this clap left here, I'm going to put that up 1 semitone. As compared to this. Yeah, that just gives us a wider sound. I like that. And then we're going to play with the timing here as well. So the snare layer, well, the snare mid's right on the grid. The snare layer is pushed behind it slightly. So this wide clap accent, I want to push forward. So let's try a couple ticks forward on that. Nice. Cool. And then on this one on the right side, I'm going to push it forward as well, but not as far as the other one. So and that adds to the perceived width as well. Nice, I like that. That is working for me. And then again, I can, adjust the decay here, so. That's pretty good for me, I think. That's going to work. And let's have a look and see what kind of frequency response we have here. So there's not a lot happening kind of below 600. So I'm just going to get rid of that just so it's not conflicting with the other layers, because we don't need that information down there anyways on this one. This is just supposed to be a wide, like real clap sounding accent. So let's I'm going to cut everything below. I'm going to cut everything around 600 hertz and below. Cool. Kind of mix those in, kind of tuck them underneath the other layers a little bit. Okay, so now we have our 3 layers here. Let's do a little processing on all the samples together. We're almost there. Okay, so we have all of these, the snare mid, the snare layer, and the wide claps all going to this clap group here. So on this one, the first thing I'm going to do is add a little touch of distortion. So I'm just going to use this defacer plugin. I've used it a lot on this channel here, but it's a nice little free distortion unit. I think it really does sound quite nice on clap snare sounds, particularly just anything with a lot of mid-range to high mid-range content in it. So subtle little bit of distortion there, which is just going to kind of help tie everything together and add a little bit of harmonics. Let's try some compression on this. I think maybe to just bring up the body and help just glue everything. So let's go here. Let's see. Go for 2-to-1. Move that attack time up a little bit. not looking for a lot of compression here, just a little bit, like I said, to help gel everything together and to kind of bring out the body of the layers. And if you listen, you can hear that it's definitely doing that. So without the compression, cool. A little bit of compression, and let's just finish this off with a little safety EQ. Because I'm adding the distortion at the beginning here and then the compression, I just want to make sure I'm not getting any extra harmonics that's been added by the distortion. So I'm just going to add a safety low cut here just to make sure we're not getting any stray frequencies below around the 250 mark on this. And the last thing that I'm going to do here is send these through a reverb. So I have this reverb set up here. It's just have a preset I made. All it is a simple plate reverb with the lows rolled off. This is just kind of a starting point. So I'll usually, maybe adjust the decay time depending on the tempo of the track. I might roll off even more of the top end, depending on what kind of sound I want. This is just a nice kind of starting point for clap, snare, reverb. So let's go ahead and send these over to the reverb. I'm going to send the whole group over there. And that really just kind of brings it to life, a little bit of reverb. I usually kind of go for, sometimes I'll go for a little bit more of a reverb sound on the claps and snares, but a lot of times I just keep it a little bit more subtle, tucked back to where you notice it when you take it away, but you don't really notice it that much when it's in until you take it away. And there we go. Now I have a custom clap snare hybrid, combo loop that I can bounce out, which I did, and put it in my sample library and use it in a future project. So hopefully you found this video useful. If you have any comments or questions, drop them below. If you want feedback on your track, the link for that is in the description. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll catch you soon. Take care.